Yehuda Geberer with a special episode of Jewish History Soundbites live from Prague, and I'm here with
Nachi Weinstein with a special edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast live from Prague.
And we're here with our very good friend and colleague and collaborator, the one and only legend Dovi Safier. And the three of us are here together in a Prague hotel room on at the end of a very special trip that we were privileged to be a part of, a Daf Yomi Siyum with Reb Srili Bornstein and the Lakewood Daf Yomi Chabura, which made a Siyum on Maseches Saitav, the Daf Yomi, and started Maseches Gittin. And we did this tour the last few days of Central Europe. And we're going to recap a little bit of the tour and try to get into some history discussion here, all three of us together, and to the benefit of all the listeners of our podcasts. So actually the first day, Dovi was able to work out for us a very interesting tour of Vienna. Dovi, can you tell us a little bit about what that tour was like and what we found historically interesting on that walking tour of Vienna?
First of all, thank you for having me on, guys. This is my first time ever appearing on a podcast, and quite frankly, I'm really, really nervous. It's 1:30 in the morning. We're sitting in a hotel room in Prague, and I think part of the fact that I'm doing this is because it's 1:30 in the morning in a hotel room in Prague, and we had a great time together. And we figured that it would be a fun way to recap it would be by kind of hanging out together and hanging out with all of you and talking about this really incredible, memorable 3 days where we ran around Central Europe with about 75, 80 guys, led by Shirley Bornstein, the incomparable Eli Slamowitz of ENS Tours, my friend Tzvi Rosen, who was instrumental in putting this whole thing together miraculously. And we kind of just did things on the fly, at least the touring aspect of it. But the day was really, I said the first half of the day was pretty serious. It was Seder for an hour and a half in the morning, and Reb Srili gave a Daf Yomi shir, and really some of the most iconic locations across Central Europe. We had the first Daf Yomi shir was literally yards from the Chassam Sofer's Kever. It wasn't in the Kever, because that would be a little weird. Not to have Daf Yomi shir in the Kever, although some people think that bringing guitars and singing inside the Kever is also weird, and I'm yet to, totally decide how I feel about that, but I enjoy singing, so it wasn't bad. But that was very cool. And next day, Yehuda was really, for you, it was really special, I think.
Yeah, it was. So that first day, before we went to the Chassam Sofer, we were in Vienna. And
Nachi missed that part, right? So what we did was, when we were doing a little research for this trip, like 2 days before, we realized that it's kind of an auspicious time, and we're approaching an anniversary, and a very important anniversary. And considering this is possibly, I don't know whether it's Rebbe Stefansky or Shirley Bornstein's Chabura, which is the largest Daf Yomi Chabura in the world, I don't know. But both of them have tens of thousands of listeners and really have changed the landscape of Daf Yomi, and they literally have these followings that are incredible, and it's literally everything Reb Meir Shapiro ever dreamed of. And just look at the diversity on this trip, Chassidim, Sfardim, Ashkenazim, even Litvaks like me, but it's really incredible. And so what we did was we realized that 1923 is the 100th anniversary of the first Knessia Gedola, when Reb Meir Shapiro dramatically announced the idea, the concept of Daf Yomi, which Yehuda explained. You want to go back and just talk about how that all happened, how that went down. It's a fascinating story.
It is a fascinating story that the Reb Meir Shapiro, by the first Knessia Gedola of Agudas Yisrael, which took place in Vienna, he has this vision of Daf Yomi. He's somewhat unknown. He's a 36-year-old rabbi in Sanok in Galicia at the time, and the Chafetz Chaim who was excited and wanted to help him with this vision that he had, and he had him walk into the Knesset Gedaila later than everyone else, when everyone else was already seated, and then the Chavetz Chaim stood up for him. When the Chavetz Chaim stood up, everyone else saw the Chavetz Chaim standing up, and everyone was, who is this speaker? And Rameir Shapiro was quite a dynamic speaker, a very charismatic speaker. So everyone was ready for whatever he had to say. And Rameir Shapiro spoke about his vision for Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, and he also mentioned the idea that we would bring the Jewish people together through their eternal treasure, which is the Torah itself, by everyone learning a daf a day, the same daf, and everyone all over would be united in this study of Torah by learning the daf yomi, which was a somewhat revolutionary concept. He even very poetically said it, which we spoke about there, that he saw it on the daf of the Gemara itself, that the Mishnah was written in the Eretz Yisrael, and the Gemara was authored in Bavel, and Rashi was in France, and the Taisus were in Germany for the most part, and the Marsha in the back of the Gemara was in Ostroy, which is today in Ukraine, and the Marshal was in Lublin, and each one with their contribution came from a different part of the Jewish world, and they're all united on the Daf Gemara. So how would it be if everyone would be on the Daf Gemara learning that every day? But what Dovi did for us is that for the first time, we've been to Vienna many times on tours, but he mapped out a route going to the buildings where the Knesset Gedaila was, where the Chavetz Chaim in that famous video walked down. We were standing in that alleyway and dancing in that alleyway and pointing out the original building is not there, but it's the same address of where the Knesset Gedaila took place, which was an amazing moment to be standing there in the middle of the Vienna street and saying, this is where history happened, this is where Daf Yomi started.
By the way, it's much more comfortable singing and dancing in cemeteries, as weird as it is, than singing and dancing with yarmulkes in the streets of Vienna, because those looks that we got, it's definitely never happened over there much of that location, which leads me to believe no one's checked that out. I know that the theater where the second Knesset Gedaila was held, it was bombed during the war, but I think it was restored. I think Dirshu once held an event there. But this is just an office building. But the alleyway, and if you look at the pictures, I think Chavetz Chaim walking, right? You see that alley, and we sang and we danced and we spoke about it. We spoke about how this place where the Knesset Gedaila was held was actually a circus. It was Circus Rennes. It was a place where they put on high-end circus performances. They went from the old gypsy model of circuses to try and, it was a German company that tried to really turn circus into a theatrical performance with equestrian and gymnastics, all kinds of acrobatics, and it became something that was sought out, by royalty and by the high class folk. And in fact, I think it was Franz Yosef who had one of his quote-unquote Sheva Bruchas over there at the circus. I think one of the nights after he got married, there was a celebration, and it was held here. So it was quite an opulent place. But I would say that by 1923, it was somewhat run down because it had been built almost 75 years earlier. But I think the question that I had going into this, and I think some other people did, was if the Agudas Yisrael was formed in 1912 in Katowice, what takes so long for them to host a Knesset Gedaila 11 years later, right? So I think that people who read, we once saw an article about the Rav HaNazir. We talked about this a little bit. And what does the Rav HaNazir have to do with the Knesset Gedaila? And his Rebbe, Rav Kook, has everything to do with it. Is that Rav Kook comes in summer of 1914 for what is supposed to be the first Knesset Gedaila, which was to be held in Frankfurt or Berlin. I think Frankfurt. But I don't recall at the moment which city it was. He arrives in Germany. And not long after he arrives, World War I breaks out. And this Knesset, which was supposed to be held in Elul of 1914, was never held. And obviously, Rav Kook ends up in St. Gallen in Switzerland, and ultimately in London through World War One. Then he gets back to Israel, but obviously we're off topic, because I like to go off topic. Can we talk about Jenny Miller, by the way? Because that's what I thought we were going to do.
I think with Dovi Safier we have to talk about Jenny Miller, right? How is he going to do something and not talk about Jenny Miller?
The problem with Nachi Weinstein, because, I really know only things that happened, I would say, after Volozhin opened, 1802, until the Byron Cutler died. So it's like a 160-year period. Nachi knows everything that happened, like the 2,000 years preceding. So we're going to have to kind of find a middle ground. So we'll find some stuff that are interesting.
We actually discovered that the super talented Nachi, besides for everything he did know here, he pointed out to us 2 drawbacks of our trip, that none of the places we visited were in Italy, so that kind of limited him. And he also said that people like the Chassam Sofer lived after the 1800s, and therefore, not really an interesting time period in history. So, Nachi, what did you feel about the historical places we saw on this trip?
Prior to this trip, had you ever heard of any of these people, like Chafetz Chaim and Chassam Sofer?
Guys, I learned Chafetz Chaim.
Wait, forget it. I also discovered on this trip, I'm just going to go, we're just going to say it, Nachi's a pretty yeshivish guy. I never realized this, but Nachi is for a guy who's like a shtickle academic and he's in law school and he hosts some pretty high-end talent on his podcast. Yehuda doesn't host anyone but himself because he's high-end talent. But pretty yeshivish guy, hat, jacket, tzitzis out. I was very impressed. Very impressed. Whilst me and Yehuda, I don't think we were ever really hat and jacket all the time, tzitzis out guys. But we're still yeshiva guys at heart. Right? Yehuda came to this trip. I don't think he brought a button-down shirt. But, that's just,
Listen,
that's just Yehuda.
I missed Vienna, as they said, so I don't have much to add on Vienna. Unfortunately, I wish I would have seen it. But the interesting thing is, W, you mentioned walking through Vienna was uncomfortable. We just walked through Prague past midnight. I walked through in a hat and jacket and tzitzis out and white shirt, and it was very comfortable, no issues. A beautiful city, by the way. But anyways, what you were saying, so I do know some later history. I did learn in yeshivas, Baruch Hashem. I learned Chafetz Chaim, I learned many of these Sfarim. Familiar with the Chassam
You learned
Sofer.
in Philadelphia yeshiva.
Yes.
Jenny Miller.
Jenny Miller, there you go. Jenny Miller.
Have you ever heard of Jenny Miller?
Mishpacha article.
Really? What about the chair? Did you know about the chair in Shmuel's house?
I actually didn't know about the chair. I've been in Shmuel's house. Obviously, we would go on Yom Tov. Like, for sure, as I recall, he would speak in his house.
Okay, we made up, we're not talking about Jenny.
But anyways, but going back to that, of course, like Yehuda said, is true. But I do know some modern history. I've done some things on the podcast. I know less than the 2 experts with me in this room in Prague. But I do know something about it. But I think what was so beautiful about this trip, and again, like Yehuda said, I'll also recognize, Eli Slamowitz and Ian Torres, Shirley Bornstein, and the Chevra over here. It was really a terrific trip, very enlightening. It was really Taru Gdula b'Makam Echad. We had just great Gashmias, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit, but also the Ruchni Seder every day, Daf Yomi Shir, and these places, these real places with major historical importance to the Jewish people. But also, it was just a really interesting trip to see these places where, as we said, we went to the Chassam Sofer, we went to Bratislava, Pressburg, and we get to see the Chassam Sofer and the Chassam Sofer later history. But we also went to Nikolsburg, where we had some earlier history. We went where there was Rabbi Shmulka, but I was able to, the Tzemach Tzedek HaKadman and Menachem Mendel Krochmal was there, an earlier Mechaber. And
was there's 2 Tzemach Tzedeks?
There's Tzemach Tzedek 5 sides, Lubavitch. It's like there's for some reason it becomes, instead of the Tzemach Tzedek HaAchron, it becomes the Tzemach Tzedek HaKadman, even though major place. Like, another
Who
one,
was he?
Menachem Mendel Krochmal.
Tell us that. Tell me about him, because I don't really know anything.
He was, it's going off, and he was a major Plaisik at the time. I believe, I would want to say, I'm going to try to recall who, I think he learned by the Bach. I'm trying to remember who he's a Talmud of, I think. But I wanted to just finish. The other one, you have the same type of thing, is with Rabbi Yosef Irgas. Just, I have to tie in Italy over here. I have to bring in Italy.
Bring in Italy.
Rabbi Yosef Irgas, the Shomer Emunim, one of the preeminent Mekubalim who explains the Kabbalistic, basics. He's a basic introduction to Kabbalah, was the Rav in Livorno. Came from a very prominent, wealthy family in Livorno, and he lived in Livorno in the 18th century. And Rabbi Yosef Irgas wrote a famous sefer called Shremer Emunim. It is a classic work until today. Somehow he was zeicha with Shremer Emunim HaKadmon because of the Shremer Emunim. Now you guys are the Hasidic guys here. For some reason, the Hasidim displays these famous, world-famous Gedolim. And not to detract from the Hasidim, by the way. I mean, we're talking about major rabbis, but it's just an interesting thing. It takes away. They become, if you see any sefer today, Shremer Emunim HaKadmon, and it's Tzemach Tzedek HaKadmon. That's what they're called, even though they were major. Anyways, I just want to finish this thought with. I want to finish this thought by saying that it really was. We were able to see both new and old history. You know, coming to being in Holišev, we saw the Shach, which is older, and we'll get to this. And then being in Prague, you really have history until from Victor Kara and from the Maral, and then we got up until Shir, who just for Dovi special.
Prague really excited you, Nachi. I saw that today. Tell us what excited you in Prague.
Prague really excited me. I think a lot of things. Being in, also, I'll just say this is my first time really in Europe. Sitting next to two veterans of Europe. This is like my first time. This is really fascinating.
Neither of us are veterans. We didn't fight in any army. Trying to let you know that.
Veteran travelers.
Okay.
But it really was amazing. I think things that stuck out to me, being in the old cemetery in Prague, right? Going into Altneu Shul, of course, but the old cemetery where it's like you have the buildings all overbearing around you with the trees hanging over and all those graves sunken in, being all around. Walking in, the first kera that just hits you in the face, so to speak, is Reb David Gans, the Tzemach David, the major historian, one of the Talmud of the Maral. He knew Brahe and Kepler, and he was the astronomers. I mean, he was a real fascinating individual, and the others, and then also going to the newer cemetery, of course, seeing the Neidav Yehuda and others. But for me, one of Rabbi Fleckless, Talmud of the Neidav Yehuda. I've learned his Svarim, gone through his Svarim, Ma'aser Rabbi Lazar and Haggadah Pesach, amazing. His Oilish Chaydesh, Harishan, Hasheni, Ashlishi, his drushes there, amazing things that I've gone through and learned. And to be next to his kever and to, you're not in the same presence as him, he's not alive, but you feel that and you're able to kind of see that one of the Gedolim. And he was later history, guys. He's in the 19th century. Av Bezin of Prague. So this is just something amazing. But I'll let you go back.
I want to point something out. I come from the world of, my background is a little bit in the world of finance. And in the world of finance, we like to make fun. Is that nobody talks about a hedge fund manager. They say he's a big hedge fund manager. So I find by the Shalos and Chuvas guys, guys that are into halacha, all that, everyone's a big pasuk, right? So are they like small paskim, or everyone's just a big
small paskim everyone forgot about, and it's really the big ones that stood the test of time. I mean, just the Neidav Yehuda had hundreds of Talmidim. There's a reason people remember Rabbi Lazar Fleckless and not some of the others. Because
also, I think we said that Fleckless is like a top 10 name. No?
Top 10 last name. Fleckles
what does it
Fleckless? Mean? I don't know. I would suspect, and I haven't done last names yet on this podcast, I would suspect that maybe his grandfather worked in the local shlachtais flicking feathers off of chickens. That was his job, so it was Fleckless. But it could be that there's 12 other explanations for what that name means.
Yeah, I don't know either. I know he's a descendant of, I think his name was Meir or Moshe Meir Pereles, who was a Dayan. He was in Prague also. He wrote a sefer, Megillah Sefer. We have it on Megillah Esther. I know Lezer Flecker says he's a descendant of his.
Isn't Megillah Sefer of Yaakov Emden?
That's his autobiography. It's one of talking of Prague, a sefer on Mr. Megillah.
We just like talk sports or something.
No, we'll stay this. But I want to get to one more thing. You mentioned famous, and I want to jump back to the. I want to go back really to pick it up, and we'll go in the trip with Bratislava. But just you asked about the Tzemach Tzedek, and his Rebbe was the Bach. His years were 1600, 1661. His Talmud was Gershon Ashkenazi, the Vedas HaGershuni, another very famous place. But really, the Tzemach Tzedek is famous for he was involved with a lot of takanas. He was involved with the fish, breaking the monopoly on the fish. The Goyim were ripping off the Jews, and there's some other things going on. He's quoted. What he means by a famous pasuk, I think, especially with the Shalos and Shuvas, is like Yehuda said. They last the test of time. They've been quoted again and again and again. I mean, there's many, many major rabbanim we don't know about. They didn't have ksavim, they didn't have writings, or whatever the case is. But he's someone that's quoted. He's a very big pasuk, and I mean. I'll just leave it like that. So I don't know if you guys want to get back to Bratislava. You guys can really talk about this.
But it is good because it's really Weinstein for sure. But you're like one of the arbiters as to people who get to decide who is a big pasuk. You got to admit it. It's a good feeling.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think I get to decide. I don't think I'm a barachi on this. You think what do you mean by that?
When Achi Weinstein says this sefer is a major sefer, is a big pasuk.
I don't think that's true. I'm not qualified.
Most of these svarim are not learned in yeshivas, right? And that's where people know about. For the most part, they learn about. So if you're not like a bibliophile, right, and you don't know about these svarim,
so
you rely on a guy like you or like Shirley who brings down all these svarim all the time, right?
I think that's 100% right, Dovi.
To find out, I mean, just
not specifically Nachi, but people like him.
Nachi, it works to every job. In Mishpacha, we get to create gedolim, so it's just a different. It's a different thing, but it's you got to admit it. It feels good.
I will say there's some truth because he is quoted in halacha, but again. Most people go to Nikolsburg. As you went, right, you go there and you see the farm. You see Ramotcha Benet has this massive kever. And next to Ramotcha Benet, Reb Shmelka has like a small kever with some gold on it. And then next to him, smaller, is the Tzemach Tzedek. So he's there, but I assume that most people and most tour guides, not our expert tour guide Yehuda Geberer here, probably kind of, I assume, and listeners can correct us, they don't know the Tzemach Tzedek, who he was, or Nachman Krochmal, what's going on over here. Maybe they think it's Nachman Krochmal, I don't know, they're confused with what's going on. But, right, so in some ways, yes, there's truth.
What we do know, and this has been pointed out many times, and especially in America when you go to the cemeteries, there is zero correlation, and maybe it's the opposite, between Matzeva size and greatness. And in fact, they're the people that build mausoleums for themselves. And even Rebbes sometimes, the Chassidim build mausoleums for them to prove how great they are, right? But it really means nothing. And you go to the old Jewish cemeteries in New York, and you see mausoleums built for people, and you see they've been locked for who knows how many years, and most likely they have no Jewish descendants even, many of them. I'm trying to think of Gedolei Yisrael, obviously the major ones. Sometimes it gets built later because it becomes a Schisi Yugulaini and people start coming to their caver en masse, or like obviously like the Zamarov, people like that, where they already know that it's going to be a major site. People are going to come welcome Tefillah, right? The Bava Rebbe, people like that. They have even like the little awning they have in Har Menuchas, right? Where Aaron or Moshe, right? And our bells are buried. They have like an awning there for the heat, right? And I think the two people I could think of that have like quote unquote mausoleums in Israel, right, are Meir Shapiro,
Har Menuchas,
right,
are Meir Shapiro and the Chida,
Harry Fischel.
Har
Zayis.
But I want to just Indian to quote
Harry Fischel, by the way, needs Jewish history side.
Definitely.
I just want to jump in before I get back to Yehuda. I want to Indian, but it's Indian. I said to quote Reb Shrilly here.
But you see, it's not yeshiva.
It sounded yeshiva.
Has anyone ever said that on your podcast?
No, I never said that.
Do you use that on Svarim chatter? Stop when you have guests.
Usually not. Usually not.
Indian, but
I was really Bornstein on his trip. This is what Shrilly uses in the raid bites. But I want to point out something that goes very, with what you're saying, Davi, is that there was one thing that really shocked me on the trip. It shocked me. It did. We walked into the basic forest, the small old one in Bratislava, in Pressburg, and everyone went to the Chassam Sofer, rightfully so. Moshe Sofer, the Chassam Sofer, we're sitting there, Rabban Shekol B'nei Goyla. But right when you walk in there, it's like underground for those that have been there. It was the first time I was there. And you walk in, and the first kever on the right is a broken kever, and there's like propped up this yeshivish white plastic sign. Who is it? It's Rav Shalom Igra, who dies in 1801. He's before the Chassam Sofer. Rav Shalom Igra is the Rebbe of the Ktsois, the Nesivis. In yeshiva, I grew up in Mesivta. I heard Rav Shalom Igra going adir, and his kever can't even. No, so my friend writes me. I put it on my status. He says they can't fix Rav Shalom Igra's kever. So I wrote back to him. They can't fix Rav Shalom Igra's svarim. For those listening to the podcast, explain to me why Rav Shalom Igra's svarim. I'm not sure it's in print. Even if it's in print, is this old, disgusting letters from back then? Why hasn't it been redone?
Ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like an appeal. If you do want to put out Rav Shalom Igra's svarim, Nachi Weinstein is interested in getting involved. And I'll be the first person to contribute. How's that?
There you go. Right. But so we should put together. I'll if anyone else email me svarimchatter@gmail.com.
Oh, cool. We talk about Einakluch.
But one more thing before that. But what shocked me is that Rav Shalom Igra was known as a Goyin. I mean, he really was. And somehow, of course, the Chassam Sofer is amazing. He just gets dwarfed. But we had almost 100 people in there, and almost every single person just walked right by him and had no clue that he was there. He was a few feet down and no idea. So that's what you're saying, who makes or breaks Gedolim. It's interesting.
I want to say 2 points about that as the tour guide who brings the people to these places. And in Menachem is right, it happens every time. The point is that when you're Nachi mentioned two things: the Sfarim, which I'm less involved in, that's his expertise. I'm more of a cemetery person than a Sfarim person, and you're going to a place where more than one person is buried. The rule of trips is that you're going to focus on that one person, and it's natural. It makes sense. I could give you endless. You brought up an example just a few minutes ago. People are going to Nikolsburg. They're going to be going either to the Maram Banet or the Rebbe of Shmelka, more likely the Rebbe of Shmelka, and the Tzemach Tzedek or Menachem El Krochmo is going to get overlooked. I have an even better example. How do you like this? In the Isle of the Baal Shem Tov in Mezhebish, the Oiv Yisrael, the Apterav, is buried next to him. I don't think on any tour we've devoted enough equal time to the Apterav. Maybe when we spent our time in his shul later on we go down to his shul, like for Shalosh Shudas or something, for Shabbos. But if you're by the kever, you're davening by the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. You're not really spending time with the Apterav.
That's not fair. That's not fair. I mean, you're always going to get distracted. When you have someone like the Baal Shem Tov, it's not so fair.
It's true, but it's similar to getting distracted by the Chassam Sofer and ignoring, so to speak, Rabbi Shalom Igra.
But could we discuss the Ich bin ein Einikel phenomenon? And Rabbi Shirley said something to me which really resonated. And he says that, especially you go on these trips, right? And you go to the Chassam Sofer, and like half the people are Einiklach, right? Now the Yehuda, half the people are Einiklach, right? The Maral, people are Einiklach, right? Then we have the Einiklach of the Goyim. But honestly, being an Einikel is not just something to brag about; it's a responsibility. He says, if you're an Einikel of whomever who there are Sfarim that are sitting there that desperately need to be published or republished in their manuscript form, or they haven't been republished in decades, right? And they're badly in need, right, of being fixed up. And some of them in the first place were never done properly, right? I'm not saying we're in a position to do it, but if you're an Einikel, and you want to really, do your job, stop walking around and saying Ich bin ein Einikel, right? We had this idea, right, by making those caps that say Ich bin ein Einikel and giving out different pins, like depending on who you're an Einikel of, and people could have like 6 pins, like Chassam Sofer, Maral. But seriously, if you're an Einikel and you're an Einikel of someone who's really put out some, major works, written stuff, and you've never, and it's never been published, do your job. Reach out to Nachi, and he could probably put you in touch with the right people who could do it. But this is not an appeal; it's a plea. And if you want schusim, right, you go daven there, put out their Torah, and you'll see. I could. I'm not the kind of person that says, he's going to promise you this because he promised you that. But I think it's a pretty good one.
I'm not either. I'm not a segula person, but what I could tell you is, so you want. For example, we're standing in Prague. The Maral is here. The Maral is a living person. The Maral has Sfarim. The Maral died in the early 1600s. The Maral talks to us today. You open up a Gvuras Hashem. You open up a Nezach Yisrael. You open up Maral. You realize he's talking. He's talking to us still today. And Machon Yerushalayim, Rabbi Hartman just published a new edition of his Drush Ala Torah for Shavuos. Brand new. You can read about what the Maral gave a sermon in Prague. Probably in the Altanoy Shul. You can read it now. He's here. But for some reason, I mentioned the Rishon Migra, just as an example of others, people say, like Dovi saying, Ich bin an Einikel. So go reprint the Svarim. They're talking, they're there. They're going to defend you. You're going to come up to Gan Eden. These Svarim are going to come and defend you. It blows my mind. There's Svarim not in print, not redone, not available. Forget manuscripts, which is even more money and more work. But the Svarim that are available, you can just redo. This is them. It's amazing to go to the Kever and to daven. But I would think, and I'm not qualified, so I'm sure there's others say go to the farm, but you're literally printing their words, you're printing their Torah. It's a schus for their neshama, for them, that you're learning their Torah, you're making it available for them, and it's just amazing that people walk around. And listen, Reb Sruli, as far as I know, is not an Einikel Chassam Sofer. He just, sponsored a brand new edition of Pituchei Chaisam, the Chassam Sofer's Hakdama to Yeridei, that is son of Shimon Sofer, Krakow, put together. Chassam Sofer is like Machshava and things. And I put it together with notes, a beautiful, brand new edition. So
maybe we need like a crowdfunding site where people could launch campaigns to put out Sfarim. That'd be cool. It's a good idea. Maybe we have a listener out here. among the probably tens of thousands that are going to listen to this podcast, that wants to put together a platform to crowdsource Svarim. That'd be pretty cool, huh?
So I wanna make it too much Svarim chatter. Let's go back to Jewish history sound bites here.
We're trying to keep things even.
No, it's even. But I think we should go in the direction of Jeff. I mean, going back to what I was saying about Bratislava, Yehuda's probably been there. I want to ask Yehuda a question. Somehow I became the moderator here for a second. You've been there many times. My first time there, I said this thing that shocked me. But of course, other than that, I don't know what stuck out to you from this trip, going to Bratislava, being by the Chassam Sofer, what stuck out to you from the trip?
By the Ksav Sofer, what I liked was Ksav Sofer's in the new cemetery higher up above the hill, from where the Chassam Sofer is buried, and that's the new cemetery, which is pretty much intact, more or less. And there were several people who told me before the trip, instead of Ich bin ein Einikel, this was a better one. My Zayda was the Reish HaKuhul in Pressburg, Bratislava, before the war, and since he was the Reish HaKuhul and had a lot of money, he's buried next to the Ksav Sofer. And I kind of brushed it aside because what are the odds that, so many people's grandfather was Reish HaKuhul? What surprised me was that I found every single one of these Kvarim, and I took pictures for them. Some of them are my neighbors in Beit Shemesh, and it was amazing. So that's what surprised me, and it started to get me thinking again about how large and prestigious and historic this community was, that there were quite a few Rashi Hakol over the centuries, and they're all really buried next to the Ksav Sofer, and some of them have some prominent, large, somewhat ostentatious matzevas, gravestones that I noticed, and that was interesting to see. We also found some children and grandchildren of the Chassam Sofer, his youngest daughter, Simcha, who passed away in the early 1900s. It was amazing that 75 years after the Chassam Sofer's passing, his daughter was still alive, so she's buried right near her brother, the Ksav Sofer, and the Ksav Sofer's Rebbitzin. So we had some of the Rebbitzins too, which is always nice also, especially since Dovi reminded us with the Jenny Miller article to never forget about the women as well. The next day we went to Holišev, to the Shach, what?
Oh, we did after Nikolsburg.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think.
Yeah, we went to Nikolsburg, and then we went to Holišev and the Shach.
By the way, Nikolsburg, beautiful town. Underrated.
Beautiful town.
Beautiful town to walk around. You feel like you're somewhere in the Mediterranean. It's really a nice town.
Yeah, in fact, Dovi and I, the Seder we have to admit, the Seder was going a little too long for our taste. Nachi was learning very stark. But Dovi and I took a little break. We went to a coffee shop in Nikolsburg where allegedly Reb Shmelka would go have his coffee. So that was also pretty historic as well.
I just want to jump in for a second that it was a really pretty town. And if anyone wants videos of the mayor, you can ask Dovi.
So...
By the way, yeah, if anyone does know, we met there's a Yid who lives out there who really gave us a little bit of a tour. Fascinating person. Really fascinating person who seems to have devoted his life to taking care of the town of Nikolsburg. Shout out to him because he's doing great work out there, preserving the basic forests. It seems like he added that like gold lace to Shmelka's caver, which definitely his matzeva, which is definitely deserving. And also, obviously, we had the great Dovi Meisels singer with us on the trip, and we got to sing Every Year is a Big Tzaddik in Nikolsburg, right? Which is really, I think it's a niggin of the current Nikolsburger Rebbe. So that was a Nikolsburger niggin that we knew. But since there's one HG guy sitting with two very academic guys, I'm just going to go back to Chassam Sofer again. But I have to say one thing. If you've never been to Chassam Sofer's Keber, I can't even try and describe to you what it's like. And Yehuda should probably, if he hasn't done an episode on it, he probably should. The whole story about how it came to be. But the Chassam Sofer is buried literally in a tunnel, which is burrowed underground underneath the train. No, it's a miracle, and people have tremendous chusim for saving that small part of the Beis forest. But it's just something about it. Going down there, it's dark. It's in this cave. It's one of those
surreal.
It's surreal. It's absolutely, it's dark. and you get that feeling in there. You walk in there single file, and it's Chassam Sofer. It was, Chassam Sofer, and it's incredible. It really have that feeling, and it really lends itself to tefillah, like almost like no other kever I've ever been to. And then I'm not a Hungarian or a Central European. I sometimes like to say that on one side my family comes from Lita, and the other we come from Lezhensk, right? So I love the Chassidish Maises. I just don't ever believe them. But really, I have no connections with Chassam Sofer in that world, other than some of the Torah I've heard from Sruli and obviously others, because everyone knows some of the Chassam Sofer's Torah. But it really is a surreal place. So on your next trip to Shaila, it's not that far from there. It's Kedai to go, and no one ever regrets going to Chassam Sofer's kever.
I want to add one more thing before Yehuda talks about Holišev, is that something that really struck me today in Prague. I'm not a muffus guy, as Yehuda likes to say, but there's some type of just hashgacha pratis when we saw this in Bratislava with the Chassam Sofer in this cave as David described, and you have Ramshal Migra and Abdinil Prostitz, you have others in there. And then we were in Prague, and we go to the new cemetery today. And this part was rescued in Bratislava. There's nothing left of the old cemetery. There's this little cave. And then we went in Prague, we go to the newer cemetery where the Ned Yehuda is, and most of it is like gone. It's a parking lot, and there's a big building, and a huge TV antenna. I don't know what's going on over there. And you get to the back where the Rabbanim are, again, Ned Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar Flekas, and we'll talk more about it. That also was saved. And that really was saved the communists. It's just, there's a certain hashkacha that the big major Rabbanim they were saved despite everything else being destroyed of the cemetery.
Well, yes and no. I think in Vilna there's still a battle, right? To try they're always.
I'm just, there was a certain hashkacha here that stuck out to me. That's all. With the trip that we went to these two places with these two basic cars, they just stuck out to me.
Right. I want to just describe the moment that Nachi had when he was able to go to the caver of Shir.
That was a very...
Rappaport, the son who I discovered, I had no idea, was the son of the Ketzais, which is pretty major. And Nachi loves to talk about Shir, as does Yehuda, and I had no idea what Shir was. I always thought Shir was a girls' camp somewhere in the Catskills. I'm being totally honest, I didn't know about Shir, but now I got to learn a little bit about him. But if you saw Nachi's face when he saw the Matsever and he started reading it, and then I got to walk with Nachi through the tall weeds of the cemetery, and he knows these names of people, like random people buried in the cemetery, like neighbors of Shir and cousins of Shir, and he was just telling me this person lived here, and that person lived here, and that person was a doctor, this guy was a Rosh Hakul, and it was pretty cool because he really knows his stuff when it comes to that era and these people. But obviously going to Yehuda's kever was also highlight.
It was and Nachi did like going to Shir's kever. We also found Baruch Yetlis's gravestone. It was incredible. Nachi says it was his first time in Europe, and going this, he was almost like a tour guide. So I think we're going to make a push for Nachi to drop the law career. There's enough Jewish lawyers out there, and we need more good quality tour guides. So if you think Nachi would make an excellent tour guide, then you can share with us your thoughts as well about that. The reason Nachi is fascinated, and I am fascinated, with people like Shlomo Yehuda Rappaport, the Shir, or Baruch Yetlis, were because these moderate maskilim were also rabbis. They were what we would call religious rabbis, Shomrei Torah U'Mitzvos, big Torah scholars as well at the same time. They're like these in-between figures because they're at the same time they welcomed and promoted the ideas and ideals of the Haskalah, of the Jewish Enlightenment. And therefore they're nuanced figures, and they're exciting because our world does not like nuance. We like black and white. So when we find someone who's confusing to us, he's a maskil, but he's also a rabbi. He's a maskil like Baruch Yetlis, but he also respected the Na'id of Yehuda, and he also wrote what was the sefer that he wrote, Nachi?
Tama Melech, Anshara Melech of Rabbi Yitzchok Nunez, not Nunish, Machon Yerushalayim, Belmonte, major sefer on Rambam.
And here he's writing a commentary on the sefer. He's a rabbi in Prague, and he's also a maskil. So they're confusing figures, and confusing people makes us excited. Maybe because we're confused. I don't know. it's something to discuss with your local therapist or whatever. And to see that and discuss that can make it an interesting part of the trip. Obviously, not to take away from the main things like the night of Yehuda, or as we saw the day before in Holišev, going to the Shach. The Shach is one of those Svarim that doesn't need reprinting. It's printed in every Shulchan Aruch, and it's such a classic sefer. And I pointed out to the group how he had finished it by the time he was 24 years old. And I don't want to share with the listeners how unaccomplished I was by the time I was 24 years old, relative to what the Shach accomplished by the time he was that age. And you're in his shul. It's not his shul, it's a 500-year-old shul, and many people daven in that shul. But the Shach was probably the most famous rabbi of that town. And again, we heard a very nice shir from Reb Shirley Bornstein in a place where the Shach may have gave regularly, not may have, he regularly delivered shiurim, and it's like things come around again. The Torah is still being shared, and it was also a very historic moment to be there in Holišev by the Shach.
I appreciated really what Reb Shirley pointed out about the Shach, that he lived through the darkest of times, right? Gezeres Tachbatat, and he still remained this extremely positive person. And if you look at his writings, you don't realize that this is somebody that literally went through hell, went through one of the worst periods in Jewish history, and we tend to forget, all these years later exactly what it was, but it certainly was. You go Mount Rushmore of awful periods in the last 500 years or 600 years. It's definitely Tachvatat. It's got to be up there. It's not what 2:15 in the morning in Prague. We're not going to do like a Hall of Fame of Jewish tragedies. But it really is something that's definitely worth exploring again. I think Yehuda has a podcast on it as well.
One of the early ones. You do too? Nachi has one also.
With Professor Adam Teller, the post-Tachvatat, I think he told me, it's an excellent book, Rescue the Surviving Souls, and he talks about, I think, like a third of the Jewry was killed out. I mean, it was only 50,000 people compared to like the Holocaust, but like I think that was the number. I could be wrong, but it's an amazing
Jewish
number.
People living in those areas.
In Poland, the Polish kingdom of Poland, just like Ukraine and Poland, and the Shach wrote a history of this, Megillas Eifa, and then there was actually printed. Tzvi Rosen, who's a Ben Acher Ben, printed now the Slichas, that for the first time since the Shach wrote Slichas, which we were zeichet to say by the kever there.
Right, with a new reprinting.
There was something else fascinating about the Shach Shul, which is, you look at the Aron Kodesh, and the Pareches is dedicated in memory of Relich Teitelbaum, in memory of the Satmar Rav. And that to me was just, I don't know, I'm never really surprised, but this shocked me. And Yehuda had a pretty good story to kind of explain the Satmar Shach, not Rav Shach, but Shach connection.
That was funny. The first time I went to the Shach Shul, I noticed that someone had donated, it's recent donation, not pre-war, obviously. And this Shach, in the Shach Shul, there's this recent Pareches donation in memory of the Satmar Rav. So you got to find the connection, and luckily there is one. And the story I told was that there was this fellow who came to the Satmar Rav and asked him why the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention in Hilchas Ribis that someone who loans money with interest, he's not going to have Tchias HaMesim. The Gemara apparently says that if you do Ribis, you're not going to have Tchias HaMesim. So why doesn't the Shulchan Aruch say that? It should mention that you're not going to be resurrected when Mashiach comes from the dead if you do Ribis. So the Satmar Rav on the spot, like instantly, responded to him, Vas artir as is a shach. What do you care that it's just a shach and not the Shulchan Aruch himself? So the guy was taken aback, so he went back and looked through every shach in Hilchas Ribis, and he couldn't find it. So he came back a second time to the Satmar Rav and said, I couldn't find it in the shach either. So the Satmar Rav opened up a shach, and he said at the end of every section of the halachas that the shach wrote in Shulchan Aruch, he besides for his long, brilliant commentary, he also included a short poem at the end of every section. And at the end of the section, again, the poetic the Shach had that side. Tim Nachi mentioned his slichas that he wrote after Tachvatatz. He had a poetic side to him. So at the end of every section of halachas, he wrote a small, short poem about the halachas that he had just written about. And at the end of the one on Ribbis, he had this poem in rhyme that said, and it included the line, something about v'chai lo yichye, that he's not going to get up at Tchias HaMesim. So he hinted here that he wouldn't have Tchias HaMesim. So it's an incredible story both about the Shach, about what he was capable of, not just writing a pirush on halacha, but also writing these poems and hinting in these rhymed lines of the poems further halachas that you would never have guessed. And then the incredible wisdom, the Torah scholarship of the Satmarav, that instantly he was able to know not just what the Shach says, but even what he says in his little poems at the end of every halacha. That was the Shach. Now, we came to Prague. The Prague is of course the Altnai Shul, and the Maharal, and the Kliyakar, and the Noda B'Yehuda, which was a major highlight, especially in the context of Reb Shirley Bornstein's Daf Yomi Shir. It's a favorite, someone who's cited one of the most there. But Dovi and I's favorite, and this is something Dovi was able to share with the whole group, was that it's also the place of the Goyim. Something that I mentioned before we get to what Dovi spoke about the Goyim, it's something that I mentioned at the entrance to the cemetery is that the Maharal, through his Sfarim that Nachi mentioned before, is taking us as Goylims and making us into wise people. The Maharal gave us these incredible Sfarim. There's incredible Torah of the Maharal. And if we engage in the Torah legacy of the Maharal, then we as Goylims can actually become Chachamim. We can become wise people. So why don't we focus on that aspect of the Maharal, of him turning us into, away from being Goylims into wise people, instead of focusing on the supposed Goylim that the Maharal made. So what did you speak about, Dovi?
First of all, if you would have asked my Rebbeim growing up if I had a better shot at becoming a Goylim or getting a chance to speak from the pulpit at the Altnai Shul, I think they would have gone with being a Goylim, right? So I have to say, kudos to Eli Slamowitz, who was able to rent out the Altnai Shul for a couple of hours. And I had a chance to speak for a few minutes, and Yehuda spoke a little bit, and we spoke about the history of Altnai Shul, and of course, like America runs on Dunkin', Prague runs on the Goyim. Everything is the Goyim. Wherever you go, they're selling these little menchies, that look like the Goyim, and there's Goyim restaurant and Goyim this and Goyim that, and there's a big Avodah Zarah somewhere of the Goyim, and literally it's like the most exciting thing going in Prague, especially when hockey season is inactive. But so we had a chance to speak about the Goyim, and of course, lots of people asking, is it true? Is it not true? And someone said, there's no way you could prove that someone didn't have a Goyim, right? You can only prove that someone had a Goyim. But I think that we're able to go through the story, and the way when we look at all of the details and we dig deep, we can see that it's pretty hard to fathom that the Maharal had a Goyim. And I think that we did actually write a For the Record column with an article that we found going back to 1861. I'll read it quickly. It says, Prague. Some young men again had the courage to break into the garret of that remarkable old synagogue called the Altnai Shul. The first time we were among them, and found many things remarkable to the antiquarian, such as a bill of divorce dated in the year 1407, a scroll containing the sections of the prophets as read in the synagogues, supposedly hailing from the 13th century, and which is the most remarkable among the fragments, a musical percussion instrument. There was also found a collection of psalms with peculiar signs over the words, supposed to have served as musical characters. The golem was not found again. I'm not sure how much of this is satire at the end, but it seems like this was a regular occurrence where you already get to the late 1800s. The rumors of the Maharal's Golem, based on probably the first book that appears, and these are really the first we hear of the Golem, right? Is around then, and if you go back to the time of the Maharal, and you're not talking about, I mean, what year did the Maharal die?
1609.
1609, right? So we're talking about a time we have recorded a Spadim from, say, David Gans, right? Who was a historian.
And a close Talmud of the Maharal.
Close Talmud of the Maharal, who would have enjoyed nothing more than to write about this incredible phenomenon that was the Golem, right? And there's nothing, right? There's other Spadim of Talmidim. Nobody writes about it. You have the Chida, Shem Agdailim, right, who talks about everything that he saw in Europe and the people he met, and definitely talks about things that he heard about. And the Chida would have been fascinated, right, by the story of Golem. And the Chida probably of people in that era was somebody that would have known how to create a Golem, right? And he also writes about all the quote-unquote Golem type people that he meets. But that's part of what makes his memoirs, his travel diaries, so interesting. By the way, I mean, Nachi seems to every week tell me about a new version, right?
3 new ones.
3 new ones that come out. So I think maybe there's like a competition who could put out the best version. But absolutely, definitely one of the most fascinating memoirs.
You also mentioned in the Adlai Shul that the general source, the Christian sources, don't bring any either. You mentioned.
No, yeah, until much later on, children's books. But what's really interesting, obviously, is the research that Professor Schneur Lyman has done. And recently, Ira Robinson's book on Rabbi Yidel Rosenberg of Montreal, and his whole story of the Sefer that he discovered or supposedly discovered in the Royal Library of Metz, right, which had all kinds of stories, fascinating stories about the Golem. But we later find out there's a small problem, is that, first of all, there was no Royal Library in Metz. It's probably a library in Metz. But he claims that he found a manuscript written by the Maharal's son-in-law, which had all these incredible stories. But when examined closely, you see that there's some problems in that. Number one, the Maharal's son-in-law refers to himself as Zatzal, right? Usually authors don't write articles or write books when they're Zatzal. And he also makes mistakes with regards to the Maharal's family. So it's clear that the person who wrote this was not the Maharal's son-in-law. And later on, which is interesting, is what Schneur Lyman uncovered, is that when Yidel Rosenberg classifies I think he wrote one of the first translations of the Zohar. Yidel Rosenberg put out many, many different Sfarim, and he classifies them in different categories, and one of them is folklore, and he puts the Maharal, he puts the Maharal in that category. So probably either he realizes that he made a mistake and he shouldn't have put this out, and now he's admitting it, right? Or he always knew and he needed to make a parnasa, so he put that out. But the rayas, the proofs, you like that, you were there, right? The proofs that the Golem ever existed, they're not really there. There are a couple of other interesting anecdotes to mention. The Stipler does mention, like I think he says the Bavosta Golem, or I don't remember the exact terms, but it seems to be that it was that when asked about it, he's saying the Golem like that people talk about, not like he's not saying that there was a Golem. He's saying that people talk about the Maharal having a Golem. I don't believe that the Stipler ever said that he believes that the Maharal created a Golem, right? But
quite frankly, I don't think the Stipler researched it either. He had better things to do.
Right, that's true. But we do, right? We have the Rav Eliyahu of Chelm.
Yes, I was going to add the Chacham Tzvi in Chuvans in Simon Sadi Gimel has a shaila if a goylem could be mitzaref to a minion, can account for one of the 10 of a minion. And he says, like the goylem that his grandfather, B'liyo Bal Shem, who was the B'liyo of Chel, made a goylem. So first of all, that's a mention of a goylem. And he says, in Rabbi Yaakov Emden talks about Megillah Sefer, but the Chacham Tzvi and make no mention of the Maral's goylem. That's the one they're mentioning, not a Maral's goylem. Maybe it got conflated, confused, I don't know.
I remember hearing of Aaron Lapiansky Shlita talk about that, tshuva. And he says that somebody once asked a rabbi about that, right? About whether a golem can be sorry for a minion. And the rabbi said, I have an entire shul of golems. He says, so it was a pashtus, right? They can be. But and then lastly, there's the story of the Rayats, the Rebbe Rayats, of Chabad, who the Frierdiker Rebbe, who as a child goes with his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and they go visit Prague, and I guess because of who he was, they're willing to bring him up to the attic. By the way, we were able to get to Alton Show for 2 hours, but we were not able to get into the attic. I don't think anyone's able to get into the attic anymore. And that's the first question everyone asks about that attic. But he describes there the Rayatz's daughter, Rabbi Simchana, said as follows: I then asked my father to tell me what he'd seen there. My father paused for a moment and said, when I came up there, the room was filled with dust and shamus. In the center of the room, I could see the form of a man wrapped up and covered. The body was lying on its side. I was very frightened by the sight. I looked around at some of the shamus that were there and left frightened by what I had seen. So what did the Frierdiker Rebbe see? Who are we to say what is like that, what he saw, right? But he was a child, and I don't know what they told him. I don't know what he saw, but probably that's the closest we have to anyone saying. There was Rabbi Marcus Hirsch, who like early in the 20th century says he heard from a former shamus, who heard from his predecessor that they were the ones that buried the remains of what was left of the golem together with the geniza that was in the attic, right, in the cemetery in Prague. But there really isn't much else in terms of proof. But that hasn't stopped the city of Prague from capitalizing big time on this myth and making a lot of money. So listen, can we say whether the Maral had a golem or not definitively? No. We're going to leave it up to you to make that decision, you the listener. But to me, it's pretty hard to imagine, and to almost all the major scholars out there, as many, Gedolei Yisrael, they don't seem to take the whole story too seriously.
I would add two more things to wrap it up. Number one, in history research, we learn a basic idea that if something should have left a trail of sources and doesn't, then that's the greatest source imaginable that occurrence didn't take place. Not everything should have left a source behind. Some things are insignificant. If someone in some random little shtetl threw an apple across the road, then I wouldn't expect that to be recorded anywhere. But Prague was the capital of the empire at the time. The Maharal was the most famous rabbi in the world at the time. He had hundreds of talmidim. There would be church records, political records, rabbinical records, Sfarim. Something should have been left in the record.
By the way, he was close with the royalty, right?
He had an audience with Emperor Rudolph.
And there would have, there's no doubt that when there were reports of that, right, there would have been said that this is the guy who created the golem. Right? And they probably would have locked him up for that too, or they would have asked him to create a whole golems for their army, and we can stop with the golem jokes, but, let's be honest, they may have had an army of golems, but it's just really hard to imagine. So there are those who do say that part of the whole deal with Talmidim who saw the golem was that they were sworn to secrecy for life.
It's speculative. The last thing I want to say is that I know we have a lot of Chabad listeners out there, and I don't want you to take us the wrong way. because I've had some disputes and some hate mail as well in the past. This is in no way means to disrespect anyone who claims that there was a Golem. And it's a legitimate opinion. And if the Frierdiker Rebbe says he saw it, then I believe him that he saw it. I'm not sure what exactly he saw, and I don't know what details that tells us about what the Maharal used with this Golem. But, that's fine. And that's a very legitimate source, and that's great to believe it. And if your Rebbe said it and you believe in the Rebbe, go for it. And no one's telling you not to. And we're presenting all the different versions here and all the different sources here, and along with our own skepticism, which I think we're allowed to have as well.
And what I would add to this is what Yehuda said in the beginning of this conversation of the Golem, which is what I heard in Yeshiva, kind of what you said, Yehuda, which is it's irrelevant, really, if the Maharal made a Golem. What is important is that the Maharal wrote Gur Aryeh, and the Maharal wrote his other Svarim. And the Maharal was the Maharal. The Golem part is irrelevant. It's relevant for the city of Prague and their tourism industry, but it's not really relevant for us. And I'll add also something about Rav Yehuda Rosenberg that I actually have somewhat a cousin who's a descendant. But about him, that he was a Talmud Chacham. He actually wrote Sefer Yadis Nadarim on a Darim that's used in other
Wasn't he Einikul of the Baal Shem by then?
I don't know. But no? I will say, we know he forged definitely the Maharal's Haggadah that he found in this Royal Library, that is not true. The Maharal wrote Gvuras Hashem that has parts of Haggadah Shel Pesach, and it's been now created into a Haggadah. But what he did, there was no Haggadah either. So we know there's definitely a lot of questionable stuff. When I had Rabbi Shua Hartman, the foremost expert on Maharal, you can listen to that podcast episode from a while back on Sfarm Chatter. He didn't want to give an answer. He didn't want to say, again, same thing. I don't want to say for sure not, but, whatever. That's the same kind of thing. I want to say, so going back to something else about Prague, in Prague today, I think this is the Golem, there's a number of other things that stood out to me, being in that old cemetery. I said that was really awe-inspiring, is, first of all, so the kever of David Oppenheim, who I've done a podcast episode in the past. I don't know if you have, Yehuda, if you have not. He's the major bibliophile chief rabbi of Nikolsburg before he came to Prague. In the early 18th century.
By the way, underrated rabbinate, Nikolsburg, right?
Yes.
I don't think most people realize, right? You go through who were Rabbanim in Nikolsburg.
Maharal was also a rabbi there.
Who else?
Shamshon Hirsch
Was it right? Isn't that, was he in Frankfurt already when he applied for the job as chief rabbi of England? Is it in Frankfurt? Or was he in Nikolsburg then? I don't even remember. Another thing we wrote about a long time ago. We could probably go back and look. I don't remember. But it's fascinating because you think of Nikolsburg as some backwater, but it really is not.
Right. Rav David Oppenheim was there. Rav David Oppenheim was we walked into the shul today. What was that? The in the Klois, in the Klaus shuls they call it now. And the Aron Kodesh says, Katzin, whatever, Shmuel Oppenheim in Tuf Nun Vav in 1696, and Shmuel Oppenheim was fantastically wealthy. He was a courtier, Shmuel David Oppenheim's uncle. And if David Oppenheim becomes the chief rabbi of Prague, he has a major library, which stays in Hanover because of the censors. It doesn't come here ever. There's a whole long story how it ends up being sold. It ends up in Oxford, in the Bodleian Library, the MS Up, OPP. And he many Svarim that we have today, they're original old editions or manuscripts, they're only because of this library that we still have them today, and now it's in Oxford. So besides for being a major Talmud Chacham, Chuvas Nishal David, other things that are recently being published from him, Shem David Al-Tera, Yad David Al-Tera, Megillah Sefer, Masechta Megillah, someone just printed, massive Sefer. So his kever, another one, the Kliyakar, I think we mentioned, and then Rivka Tiktiner, Meneka's Rivka. Yehuda talked about this. Yehuda can talk about her more. He goes to her kever when he comes here, but she was the first full sefer written by a woman that we know, printed in Prague, 1609 in Yiddish, Musa Sefer. I mentioned this that to people on the trip that there was a journal Tfunot that I don't know if it's still around, but it was pretty recent, a couple of years ago. Blue, thick, big volumes that in. I think volume 1 had half of it, and they translated it to Hebrew, and volume 2 is the rest. For those interested, I'm sure you could find it somewhere. I don't know if it's on, someone uploaded it to Academia, or it's our Chachma, and it's probably on, I don't remember who did the work, but that's a very interesting sefer, so her kever, she's very there.
In Poland?
She was from Tiktin, and she moved to Prague.
Who was the Rav Tiktin Ram Kamenovich, right?
He was the last Rav Tiktin.
Yeah. She gave, so it says, I think
it all goes back to the mirror. We haven't mentioned the mirror once this whole podcast.
You have to get it in.
If Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg is listening, he's probably waiting for that mention of the mirror. So she gave sermons. She spoke to a woman, and she published a sefer.
Very interesting person. And then there's a Victor Kara, talking about 1439. There's others. There's just really interesting. Besides, as you said, the second one you mentioned, Shir. Yeah, he was. Listen, Shir was, like Yehuda said, a complicated person, the son-in-law of the Ksais. Everyone listening, it was a maskil. But if you read Avnei Miluim, he's the Magia on Avnei Miluim. He published Avnei Miluim, and what's interesting, he was the first major biographer. He wrote many biographies on Rabbeinu Nisim, Rabbeinu Chananel, the Aruch, Rav Nassim, Rav Sajiga, the Aruch, and many others. So, and Erech Milin, he has a sefer, he has many works that he printed, and we got to see Rabbi Elazar Fleckless, and Reb Shmuel Landau, and Reb Yehuda Yehuda, of course, as you mentioned. Reb Michal Backrack is right next to Yehuda Yehuda. He was the grandson of the Chavos Yair, who Av Bezin here after, and also Basal Ransberg. As Yehuda showed me his kever, sunken in a little small kever behind the Yehuda, and he's in every Gemara. I mean, a major figure in Prague at the time.
It's really, guys, this was a lot of fun. You think it's able to get food here at 2:30 in the morning? I'm starving. We had a big dinner, but it was a long time ago. I'm kind of hungry.
This was a great trip, rich in history. We hope to have many more trips. Be in touch with me. We're going to make Nachi into a tour guide, and we're going to bring Dovi on more trips
after this is my appearance on Jewish History Chatter, I guess that's what we're calling it. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get invited back, but I think these trips are amazing, and I think that, you know, I did it with my shul last year together with Yehuda, and I think many of the guys said it was life-changing for them. It really was. And I encourage everyone, you know, it can be costly. You know, there are ways to do it economically. You can backpack through Europe, as I once did. I didn't really go with the backpack. I did the Jewish way with a couple of suitcases. But go and see these sites and really learn about them along the way. And it's just something, and Achi, for the first time there, it's just something about being there, right? We were talking earlier about Mike and the Mad Dog, right? Mike Francesa always says about being in the building, right? When you're in the building, there's just something about that, about being in the building, being there, right, in the place where it happened, and it just takes your knowledge and your interest, right, to a whole new level when you can actually see. And in Europe, we have that. We have these, you know, a lot of them are reconstructed, but you walk these streets and you see these buildings. And we actually tried walking into the Prague Opera today, and we got one of those, you know, I'm not sure if it's Judenrein at this point or what.
Privat.
But the guy basically told us to get back. So we left, even though he said that there was something going on there. We just wanted to see the building, and the guy threw us out. But an opulent, you know, beautiful building, right? And it's just, you know, it's coming to people, you know, who grow up, and wherever you grow up, whether it's in New York or in Melbourne, Australia, or whether it's even in London. You know, London isn't quite the same as these cities. So come out here and check it out, because it'll mamish change your life.
And I want to say that Yehuda is an excellent tour guide. I've heard Jewish history sound bites, but I haven't been on a tour with him, and it's not the same. I know listeners of the podcast, he's a great podcast host. But
does he still have a podcast?
Well, this is an episode. Here we go. But really, I was super impressed, and I have to say, Dovi's right. Being somewhere I was never here before is something that people should do. We should go to Italy or whatever, make another tour. But it's just, you walk in the places that the Gedolim were. You're going in their shul where they gave the drush. You know, today, Reb Shirley I think he said over parts of. Today was the day we're recording this. Earlier today was the day that Rosa Fleckles gave a hesped for the night of Yehuda in the Klaus Shul. And so he was able to say over parts of that hesped. And actually...
he said it was 230 years to the day that he delivered this hesped.
To the day, and it was the Siyam on Masechta Saita, and Shirley was reading the last two lines. He said this by the Siyam, and I jumped out of my chair, I told Shirley. But it says, Memtes Amid Beis, and part of the hesped is Saita, Memtes Amid Beis. Rabbi Elazar Fleckless is talking about. He said Oilish Chodesh Shlishi, I believe, Mili de Mariri. I think that's where it is. I believe that's where it is, which has been redone, by the way. The most of his farm.
I think you have to add if you live under a rock and you haven't heard of Shirley's Share Liquid Daf Yomi, plus you add the links for those who want to listen. Even if you don't follow Daf Yomi, he has these raid bites, which are these little nuggets of information of, you know, some that are sometimes closely related, sometimes loosely related to the Daf. Today he spoke about the famous Cleves Get, and trust me, you'll really enjoy listening to him. His passion alone makes it worth listening to, and certainly more than listening to me. And Yeah, but I'm glad you guys had me on. And
Yeah. Thank you, Dovi, for coming on. Thank you, Nachi. This was a lot of fun, and it was great having Nachi on the trip. It added a lot. And
by the way, I convinced him last minute, like literally.
Davi and Shirley called me up Thursday afternoon, finishing my law school exams.
We need you. We need you to come. And Nachi really added a lot. People were walking around the cemeteries, and Nachi's just like spitting out information. Like, it's like an encyclopedia.
Right.
So I knew nothing, of course.
No, Davi knew plenty. Davi added a lot as well. And we'll just...
But if we do this again, we could do like Volozhin and Mir and things that I know. Jenny
right. We'll speak about Jenny Miller and Volozhin and
Blake Malin.
And the Chafetz Chaim.
Why is it going to Philadelphia? Let's go. Then we get people sign up for that. I know it's not the same. I know, I'm kidding. But anyways, this was amazing for me to come on. And thank you to Eli Slamwitz and Stores and Shirley Bornstein and everybody. It was a really fantastic trip. And thank you for listening to the episode.
This was Yehuda Geberer with Jewish History Soundbites. You can be in touch with me at yehuda@yehudageberer.com for questions, comments, tours, trips, sponsorships, and lectures. And subscribe to Jewish History Soundbites on your favorite podcast platform. And here's Nachi.
Yes, with Sfarim Chatter, the Sfarim Chatter podcast, so you can be in touch with me. Also, sponsors, I don't know about tours, but maybe Yehuda wants to do it. But anyways, you can email me, nachi@sfarimchatter.com or sfarimchatter@gmail.com. And also subscribe and check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to get in touch with me, you could email these guys and they'll filter it for me. But, if it's something nice, they'll forward
Unless it's
it
about Jenny Miller, not about Philadelphia, Jenny Miller, then you can send the email.
Laila Tov.